We've gathered here to talk about the history of hell. Hell is an evil place. A place so dark and sinister that no man should quest to go there. Hell is also a band that's been around since the 1980s, though they never released an album until just a few years ago, 2011. A long and twisted history is one that definitely needs discussed, and if I reviewed their first album, I feel I did a pretty inadequate job in doing so. This was a group that definitely made a lot of waves. They had a great sound, especially for the 1980s. They used something known as corpse paint, which of course became a little bit popular a couple of years after this. It's really known as proto-corpse paint, considering it was previous to the actual universal embodiment of corpse paint by some members of the metal universe. Their stage shows were exceptionally theatric, and of course they dealt with, as you might imagine, as suggested by the band name, subjects of hating religion. Gentlemen in this band actually ended up becoming rather famous in a different regard, and the man Andy Sneap, who is of course a producer that we've talked about loads of times on this channel. Sneap, of course, ended up becoming a member of Sabbat, which formed after Hell's unfortunate disbandment, which occurred 2 weeks prior to them releasing starting the recording of what would be their debut album back in the late 1980s due to record label bankruptcy and due to a series of tragic events, unfortunately, that never saw the light of day. There was not a debut by this band until 2011. It's the reason why if you picked up this album and you notice that this is something where it's a triumphant debut album from a band that you may already know or however the label may have read, well, this is the reason why. Sneap ended up becoming a producer. He produced 2 of the 3 Sabbath albums that he was on, as well as about 100 more albums that would follow after that, including being a member of Fozzy, which is the project with Chris Jericho. Originally, Hell began, once again, as kind of just a little bit of a pet project with the intention of just, distributing some songs through some CDRs and just kind of getting the boys back together for the, hell of it and to try to actually get things together. And really there was no serious intention to go very many places with this. However, their initial songs caught wind of a couple of different record labels, and they were eventually signed by, Nuclear Blast Records, and their first album was released a couple of years ago. But now here we are in 2013, and now Hell is definitely a name that everybody should know, and if you don't know the name Hell as far as a band is concerned, then you certainly need to do that. You need to encourage yourself to examine this band. Curse and Chapter is actually the title of their second album, which just came out here this month in November. It's one in which a United States release, I believe, is still forthcoming, though it's already been released in other corners of the globe. You may actually be able to get it in North America at this point, but I have yet to see it in my store. It's the reason why I'm a little bit shaky about details of that. Now, if you have listened to the first Hell album, then you know exactly kind of what this band is all about. They do have a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal style that's been kind of imparted upon them, but they also have a lot of different subcultures that are embodied within. They have thrash, they have a little bit of a gothic subtexture to them, they have some speed metal, they have a little bit of the theatrics that you would see perhaps from a black or death metal band that's able to give it a little bit more oomph, but basically, what you need to know about these guys, what you need to really impart upon yourself is that no one song is really going to sound like another song. And the reason why this is because they're able to really mold together a bunch of different styles. They've basically had about 18 to 20 years of time between albums in order for them to really get a lot of different ideas together and listen to a lot of the things that have occurred ever since their initial disbandment, and really just create a truly unique heavy metal atmosphere. That's something that was definitely seen on the very first album, and it was definitely because of the theatrical element to the album itself. And now on the second album, it starts to expand itself a little bit further, though it's done so in a way that has just fantastic production. Andy's handling the production works once again, and it is sounding just better and better as the years progress. He was working on this as early as earlier this year, along with a couple of the other members of the project, just getting some demos together and then basically working on it a little bit more seriously than the pet project that this was, the fun project that it was back in 2010, 2011. Really, this has been 3 years that they worked on the first album. With the second album, they've been able to do it within 2. And let me tell you something, the one thing that I will say is that there was no quality spared because of the shorter time period between albums here. This is certainly one that got an undivided amount of attention. And it's definitely showcased by the fact that Andy is a damn good guitar player. He's got a lot of skill, and that skill definitely has been seen throughout the years, but it just has enhanced itself as the decades have kind of progressed. And this is something where it's showcased a lot on this album also. So you can definitely understand why a lot of his albums definitely have a great guitar tone to them, and why that seems to be something that has a great principal significance to it. And also, it also kind of explains why he does take on some of the projects that he does take on, considering this is an avenue and an area that he is very, very well trained and well versed in. Now, with this album, the guitars is not the only thing that you really have to contend with. This is definitely an all-around affair where you can definitely feel the ambiance and the atmosphere once again. Those who are familiar with Hell's first album will understand the theatrical element of this, but to those who are newcomers, the theatrical element always takes a feel of ritualism at some points in time. It always feels as though you are participating in some sort of musically driven seance, and there's definitely a lot of different thematic ideas that are being propelled here. Whenever you consider songs such as Death Squad or End of Days, Something Wicked This Way Comes, just to name a couple right there in the heart of the album, whenever you hear the whole entire thing come together, you really just have to stand up and put your horns up, regardless of how silly you may look. Harbinger of Death is another great one. A Land of the Living Dead may seem like a really silly title, but the song itself just kicks ass, and Deliver Us From Evil straight up begins basically as a portion of a mass that is turned very, very sinister. You can almost picture how this is going to be represented live if they were to really take the same theatrical steps in which it seemed as though the band was taking and did take in the 1980s. You could definitely hear these messages being delivered by somebody that is dressed up perhaps like a priest and not exactly in the most sane or rational states of mind. You could definitely see how this theatrical element, which is on the basic album package basically through sound as opposed through visual, can easily be transferred over into the visual element and create a true masterful experience. And that's something that I think really boasts well for this band, something that always kind of was a legendary aspect of this band from their 80s time, to the point where in 1983, many members of the clergy that caught wind of what Hell was doing were not too happy. But you would think that, considering their name is, well, Hell. This album, though, has a very solid mixture of all of the aforementioned styles. The new wave of British heavy metal side, they've tried to distance themselves from, at least from a basic level, but there's definitely that element that has to be stated. It has to be stated that there is a lot of different ideas from that style and that mainframe idea that certainly are able to bring their way through. And that's the fact that there's just a really, really solid structure of songwriting that's done here. And there's a little bit of a progressive element to it as well, considering they do try to match up just a number of different ideas and really just enhance each and every one of their songs in order to give them each their own unique flair and flavor. And whenever you do that, the result is basically an album that feels like a gigantic ritual in and of itself. A ritual that takes part on multiple different levels, one that exposes itself to multiple different themes, and one that certainly leaves you very, very satisfied. Once again, Hell have come forth, and Hell hath no fury, like the band Hell, considering they're able to really deliver a solid, solid work. This is certainly one that's going to take a lot of people by surprise, I feel. A lot of people that may have seen a band called Hell with one of those stickers on it that said a triumphant return and maybe would have written it off and dismissed it for no reason. A lot of people that perhaps still haven't caught wind of this band that perhaps now will catch some wind and just decide why not to give it a purchase. I'm here to tell you not to just say why not, but to seek this out. Actively go for it. Actively search for this album. And if this is one in which you have to order online and maybe wait a couple of weeks for, believe me, it's worth the wait. This is certainly one in which you really need to get yourself on board with this band and this group, because even though there has been basically 20 to 25 years that have passed between their initial period of real prominence and potential to the point in time in which they finally have released albums, hey, these old dogs don't need to be taught any new tricks, because the tricks that they had from the moment in which they got together, those were pretty damn good. But it just so happens that these old dogs have learned a shitload of tricks over the past 25 years, and they've been using it in order to craft phenomenal works. This album is damn solid. There's actually not a song on here that I really dislike. In fact, there's really multiple works on here that I could find myself listening to over and over again simply because it has that solid of a sound. There is a certain catchiness aspect to it in the fact that it's something that's very, very easy on your mind and something that does continuously take your breath away even after multiple listens. And that is certainly something that gives this album its own unique flavor, and not to mention, it also leaves them a cut above a lot of the other stuff that's out there. Really, really enjoyed this album. I think we're going to be seeing this one again, folks, because this one has all of the trademarks of one of those classics that we're going to be talking about for a long period of time. So definitely check out this album from the band Hell. This is certainly one to get. This is certainly one that I recommend. So Nation, tell me in the comments, as we've been doing as of late, tell me if you have heard of Hell prior to this, and I don't mean the place, I mean the band. And what is your favorite aspect about this band? What are your favorite songs? Let me know.